All right, let's go ahead and get started. This is day number 6 of a monster a day. So I'm recording this one because it's an odd day. It's a Tuesday, and so I'm going to kind of continue with very similar to what I've been doing. I'm going to draw the monster first, and then instead of using watercolor paint like I've done the last couple of days, I'm going to use something a little bit different. I'm going to use water soluble pencils. And my favorite water soluble pencils are made by Derwent, and they're the Derwent Ink Tense pencils. And if you've tuned into anything I've ever done, you probably know that I really love the Ink Tense pencils. So I've got some of those out, and I'm going to use those. And then if I have time, I might actually use some colored pencil on this as well, just to kind of mix it up and show people that, if you don't have watercolor and you really like watercolor pencils or water soluble pencils, you can use those, or you could just do ink. You could just do anything that you really wanted to. I mean, you don't have to do it the way that I'm doing. And that's the nice thing about this challenge, and any kind of challenge. It's like there really is no rule. I mean, I'm just doing a monster a day. That's kind of the only limitation that I'm giving myself. And each day I might try to do different things, but you can do your monster any way that you want, any kind of monster, any way with any materials. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into it, and I'll talk a little bit about the materials, and then we'll get started. So let's go ahead and switch it over. So I still have my Strathmore mixed media paper. Right here are those Ink Tense pencils, and you can see this one I use a lot. So some of them have been used a lot. Some of them are actually replacements my favorite ones I use a lot, and I can buy single ones to replace them. So I got my regular pencil, and I've got my eraser, and I got some paint brushes and water off to the side. So let's go ahead and get started, and maybe I'll think about that monster selfie, that close-up view. And I like that because it just takes up a lot more space, and things are just a little bit bigger. So I'll go ahead and start thinking about okay, where's that eye, and just kind of sketch that in. Now today, I think what I'm going to try to do, I'm not going to use the ink, or at least that's the plan. I don't know. We'll see if that changes. So I'm going to try to be a little bit neater with this. So I'm really trying to get, I'm still trying to get sketchy, and I'm trying to get it laid out. But because I'm not going to use the ink, then that's going to not create problems, but it's just going to bring up a different challenge, because I don't want these stray pencil marks to be all over the place. So that's one of the things that I'm going to have to kind of think about as I work today. So starting out the way I've done quite a bit, starting off with eyes. So this guy's going to have 2 eyes, one bigger, one little. That's one of the things that I like to do. And his mouth. And then thinking about some teeth. And there's something about a tongue I like sticking out. And actually the tongue sticking out goes back to a dog that my wife and I had. So we had a little Shih Tzu. Her name was Kyla, and we didn't have her very long because she was a senior dog when we adopted her, and she had cancer in her jaw, and she had this big lump on her chin, and it ended up getting bigger, and so we had surgery, and they had to remove a little bit of her jaw. her lower jaw, and what happened was her tongue would stick out. So anytime I draw a monster with a tongue sticking out, I think of Kyla. So it's one of the reasons I do that. So really trying a different shape with the monster. More kind of like an egg shape. Like I said, I want the pencil lines to be kind of neat. So if I have a lot of extra sketching lines, I want to get rid of them. Even though I'm not pressing hard with the pencil, they can still show up. Alright, so because I'm going to use the water-soluble pencils, I'm going to go ahead and draw in some of the details, like the spots. All right, so it's a little bit light. Hopefully you can see it okay on the video, but I think I'm ready for the Inktense pencils. So the Inktense pencils are water soluble ink pencils, and they're some of my favorite. Partly because they're all very transparent colors. There's a whole line of different colors, and they're just really good quality. They are expensive, I will say that, but of course sometimes you can find them on sale or find those coupons if you're at one of those big box arts and crafts stores. So the interesting thing is that the pencils are very much like colored pencils, so I can shade and color with them. But because they are water soluble, I'm going to paint plain water over them. And what's nice is that I can kind of color and shade fairly quickly. I do want to be careful. If I just scribble this down and I end up with some very dark lines and some very light lines, the pencil's not going to blend together very well. But this is a nice way to have some control. So I know some people with watercolor pencil watercolor paints really struggle with the control. And I mean that's one of the things with watercolor. You really have to accept the unpredictable nature of them. But with the pencil, because it's pencil, I can shade, I can draw with it and have a little bit more control. Now you can see that I did not press hard. And that's because these pencils especially, but most water-soluble pencils tend to be much brighter than their dry form. So when you paint water over them, it really is going to activate the pencil, and that's where the true color is going to come out. And so sometimes I'm a little bit leery because I feel like, if you go really dark, then it's real dark and you can't really lighten it up that easily. So I tend to go light, and if I need to be darker, I can always go darker. And try not to forget this part up here. So I'm just shading. I'm kind of using more of the side of the pencil. So yeah, this is one of the ones that I use a lot. It's called Sea Blue, and it gets a lot of rotation in my work with various different things. But anyway, so there I've got the basics, and then I need to go ahead and paint. I've got my whole range of paintbrushes here. I think I'll go with this round one. I like the round because I can get into tight areas. Let's pull the water close. And so the pencil is going to be activated with the water. And so it basically turns into kind of watercolor paint, or at least in this case an ink kind of paint. And I wanted the background to be kind of light, kind of a light pale blue. And the nice thing is, if I feel like, it's not dark enough, well, I can let it dry and then paint on top of it. Now, as I'm doing this, I can see, maybe it's not showing up on the video, but I can see that some of those lines that I shaded are still there. So it's not, those lines and that texture of the shading hasn't totally disappeared. And that's okay, but I can go back and I can kind of rub and scrub and try to blend that as much as I can. Before I do anything else, I'm going to get into this little triangle. It's a nice thing with this rounded brush. Even though it's called a round, the tip is a point. And so if I just barely touch with it, I get that point and can get into some smaller spaces. So with this technique, I'm trying to be a little bit more careful with the edges. And that's just because I don't have that black ink. Maybe I'll change my mind. Maybe I'll get through this and be like, I need to have some of that black ink. But we'll see. Okay, so got my background all done. And just like watercolor, I don't want to do anything right next to it. So the background's wet. I don't want to do the rings around the eyes. I don't want to do the skin here near the background. So I think what I'm going to do is, let's go in to, I think I'm going to try the tongue. I need to erase this a little bit more. So just like watercolor, I can kind of pop around and work in different sections. Now, I'm using a color called Deep Rose, and I don't want it to be real strong. Okay, so it's going to be a pink kind of color, but I'm just going to barely shade. I don't know if that, you might be able to see that on the video, but I mean, it's just barely touching it, because here's the thing. I want this to be a light pink, and again, if I go real dark, it's going to be hard to lighten it up. Okay. And I can do some like shading. So I'm trying to put it a little bit darker around the tongue, around the bottom of the tongue here, maybe there where the crease is. I'm going to use that same pink. I'm going to go around that inner ring of the eye. And notice where I'm holding the pencil. So I want it to be really light, so I hold it way back. And then that way I can't press real hard with it. So one of the things I do like about this is that I don't have to be super neat. If I were just doing colored pencil, I'd want to be, really take my time. I'd want to press hard with the pencil. I'd want to fill in all the spots. Okay, but you can see that, it's kind of rough and kind of quick. And I think I'll switch to a slightly smaller brush. Let's go ahead and do the rings first. So I really just want this to be kind of a pale pink. So by shading down very little, so what happens is I have very little pigment. Pigment's just the color that's in the pencil. And then there's other materials in there. I don't know what's in there that makes it water soluble, but so the pigment's the color. So when you shade very lightly, you're just getting a little bit of that pigment down, not a whole lot. Okay, so just a real pale pink, and then do the same thing with the tongue. And if I feel later like this is just too light, I can always go back and make it a little bit darker. That's the nice thing about this, is that I can build up layers on top. So I want to let it dry first, but later I can do the layers. Okay, so I want to let the tongue and the rings dry. Now I want to do the eyes. So I have this teal green, and I like it a lot. So it's going to be a nice bright green, maybe just teal. It has like a little bit of blue in it, so it's kind of like a bluish green. Now, because I'm not going to do ink, the pupils I am going to need to use the pencil and put some black in there. But who knows? Maybe I will switch it up and use some ink. I haven't quite figured that out. So with the eyes, I'm kind of just doing the outside of the eye, knowing that. Let me go ahead and rinse out my brush. Now, what I can do is kind of start out in that whiter part, and then work my way. A little too much water. Wipe it off on the cup. So real pale. What I think is like, oh, I'm just a little scared. Just scared that I'll go too dark. Okay. All right. So while that's drying, let me just kind of check. So the background's feeling pretty dry. Like it's mostly dry. Looking at the tongue and the rings around the eyes, they're looking pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing the main part of the body, which I'm going to use. This is another kind of pink. I used the dark rose or deep rose for the tongue and stuff. This is fuchsia, and fuchsia is a really bright pink. So the nice thing about this is that, I'm going to be coloring. I'm going to be shading. So for right now, I don't need. I don't have to worry about like, oh, if stuff's not totally dry, it's really not going to bleed. I can be real careful with the shading. And I'm trying to be careful as I go around the dots, the spots. And that's probably the kind of the hardest part of this. And that's why I didn't put a whole bunch in. So I'm trying to fill in kind of, the whole body. But I'm not worrying about it being like super neat and shaded very perfectly. But I am trying to keep the shading fairly even. Just like I was talking about with the background. I don't want to have a ton of like, I don't want to have like a mix of like dark lines and light lines. So this paper has a texture. It's described as vellum, as a vellum texture. So vellum just means that it's a little bit rough. And so that's why as I'm shading it, you can kind of see the white speckles of paper showing through. And that's just the vellum texture. Alright, so down here I maybe want to go a little bit darker. So one of the things to notice is that I try to go in small sections. Sometimes people want to go like real fast and try to fill the whole thing in because it takes a while. You kind of run out of patience. You're like, oh, I just want to get this done. But I'm kind of going maybe a half an inch at the most. Sometimes a little bit bigger in a more open space. So don't be afraid to turn your paper in a different direction to make it easier to fill in or to shade or whatever it is that you need to do. Okay, so around the tongue might still be a little wet. So I'm going to be careful not to kind of go into the tongue, but just kind of sticking right around the outside. So because of the texture of the paper and because I'm kind of going quickly, I'm trying to keep it even, but I'm not super successful at it. I can kind of see where it might be a little darker in some areas. Maybe there's, I can see the lines a little bit more distinctly in other areas. That's all right. So make it a little bit darker there at the tip of his arm. Or the top of his arm, should I say. Okay. Yeah, going around the spots is definitely one of the places where you have to use a lot of patience. But, going around the eyes and going around the teeth, same thing, it's a lot of stuff to kind of go around. So just like I did, I could have done it the way I did the very first time I did the paint. And I painted the whole thing with the, actually I think I was using pink at that time too. And so you could do the whole thing pink and then come back with a darker color. So it always works with a dark color. If I have, a red monster with yellow spots, I can't do the red and then come back in with the yellow. It's not going to show up. But if I have a yellow monster with red spots, I might be able to do that. The spots might look a little bit orange because of the red and the yellow, or the red might just be really powerful that it covers the yellow. So you can always experiment and see. So for this, I just decided like, well, even if I do something, I have a purple out. So I might use that purple. And, it's a dark color, but maybe we'll see. So I just kind of want to err on the side of caution. So I want to have like a little bit of shadow around the tongue. So the nice thing is, as I've been shading this, things have been drying. Okay, so you can kind of see how I have them kind of roughly sketched in, with some areas just being a little bit darker than others. That's just going to kind of give them a little bit of a three-dimensional feel. Just kind of going back and maybe accentuating some of that. Now when I paint this, I want to be kind of quick. I want to be careful not to let the ink tints dry, just like the paint. One of the things that Derwent claims is that the Inktense pencil is more permanent once it dries. So if it dries, sometimes I notice that there will be like this hard line where the edge of the wet paint dried. So that's why I want to be kind of quick about this. So I'm using that big brush that I've done before, and just go ahead and start working it in. So very much like paint, but I'm just using water. Now the thing is that I'm picking up a lot of this pigment, so I don't want to rinse it off, but I can get a little bit more water on my brush, and I touch the brush in the inside of my water cup just to get off some of that extra water, because I don't want to have a ton of water on this. So just like painting, sometimes going around spaces is the hardest part to do. So I can really go back in and try to blend the pencil marks, try to get it smoother and more even, and also just keep it wet. So I find that sometimes this is a little bit easier for me to keep it pretty even, just because the pigment's already on the paper. So I don't have to reach over and get more paint, more pigment. And if I did a decent job of shading, and then hopefully I can keep the color a little bit more even. So like before, the lip is a great kind of place to stop. Okay, so this is wet here. It's okay if I end up painting the lip now, but I do want to let that dry a little bit. So I'm going to start kind of from the opposite way. I'm going to start down here near the bottom. Yeah, I definitely feel like I was a little timid with the pencil. Just, didn't want to go too dark with it. Didn't want to put down too much of it. And then can't forget his arm. So a lot of times with this Inktense water-soluble pencils, I'll work from the lighter value into the darker value. Because sometimes that darker value can be pretty powerful. And so if you go into the dark value first and then drag it over into the lighter value, sometimes it just all looks like a darker value. Okay. So, I got a little bit of value in there, a little bit of value here behind the lip, behind the tongue, a little bit of value under the lip here, a little bit of value up in here. So yeah, I'm kind of digging that. I like how that's turning out. So the nice thing is that as I was working down here, this up here is starting to dry. But I want to give this a little bit more time to dry before I do anything else next to it. So I'm going to do something. I'm going to do the eyes, and I forgot to get out my black. So let's go ahead and find that. Oh, right there. Okay, so the eyes are nice and black. And actually, it's yeah, this is ink black. So ink black, and so it's gonna be a nice dark black here. And still want to kind of try to do that little. Oop, I just stuck my hand right into the wet paint right here on the arm. So let's turn them upside down. So I do want to press pretty hard, and I'm trying to fill this in pretty dark. And just use this smaller brush, and just really want to, I twisted it on the inside of the cup just to get it a nice sharp point. And so then that way I can paint around and really activate that black. Okay. I think I've got, let's see, do I have it here? I have a color called Thistle, and it's a purplish color. Because here's the thing, I was thinking about doing the spots a darker purple, and if I did this dark purple and that dark purple, those two would be the same. Like the ring around the eye and that horn would be about the same. So I'm thinking, let's do the horns part with the thistle. So I think the monster's body seems a little bit fairly dry. So this thistle is just it's kind of like a darker version of that fuchsia. So I'm trying to be a little bit more aggressive with this, make it a little bit darker. I think I'm going to try to using a different kind of brush now. This is a rectangular brush, and just allows me to get in there and really sort of push that pigment around. Don't know if I got that one really dark enough on that side. I think I'll grab this little brush. Okay, so while that's drying, I can go ahead and start doing the spots. I'm going to do that with the darker purple, and we'll start up here with these spots. So this purple is definitely dark. So I'm going to kind of use that to my advantage. I'm going to do it nice and dark around the outside of the spot, and maybe lighten it up as it comes into the center. So just like with the paint, I'm just kind of jumping around to different parts that are dry, because this can bleed very much the way watercolor paint does. So because I'm not using the ink, the black ink like I did with the watercolor, I'm just trying to be real careful of my edges. And with the purple, I can get pretty close and kind of fix the edges. And that way there's very distinctive spots. So even though I wasn't very neat with when I painted the water on it, coming back now with the dark purple, I can really make those spots distinctive. So I'm going to hold off with the rings around the eyes because of that part there is probably still wet. So I'll do all the spots and then I'll come back and do those rings because I'm going to do it with the purple. Alright, let's go ahead and start. We'll start up here. So you can just kind of see how that really changes with a little bit of water. I mean, it looked like a dark purple, but as soon as I added the water, I think it really just kind of popped it up. Now, one of the things that we can do, and I haven't done this before, is I've got a little paper towel here. So if I get something a little too dark, if I move my brush around and then I can wipe it off, and what that does, you can really see there how that lightened up. So it's just, that's a watercolor technique. If you ever get anything a little too dark with watercolor paint, just lift a little bit up with the brush and you can lighten it. Or the other thing I could do is like, oh, this one's too dark, but this one's too light. So you can kind of pick up some of the ink, some of the paint, and put it elsewhere. Okay, so the spots are done, and before I do the ring around the eyes, I want to go ahead and come back with this thistle. I just did not get this one dark enough. Now, one of the things that I didn't do with this, and it's just, I think it's because of time, is I didn't really mix colors together. So I could blend other colors in and, kind of create new colors if I wanted to. But, it's like I'm trying to keep this to approximately an hour. I might go over a little bit today, just because there's one more thing I want to do after I do the rings around the eyes. So with the rings, what I'm trying to do is make them a little bit darker on the outside and leave them fairly light on the inside. And hopefully that's going to create more of a rounded look, so it's kind of going to look like rings or like donuts. Just making sure I'm not sticking my hand in wet paint. I'm very good at that. So a little darker around the outside, lightening up my pressure. And then I come to the inside and I'm going to make it darker. So it's darker kind of on the outside edge of that ring and the inside edge of the ring. And then it gets lighter as it gets kind of to the middle of the ring. And we'll see if that creates a nice rounded three-dimensional feel. You can kind of see from the shading. So when we paint this, what I'm going to try to do is to put water down closer to the middle. And then that's going to start picking up some of that pigment around the outside. And then kind of work my way out to the edge. And then do the same thing on the inside. So what happens is I'm picking up that darker value. And then it's kind of bleeding into and blending into the lighter value in the middle of the ring. And if I need to, I can rinse out my brush and help it along and blend it a little bit more. And again, trying to make it a little bit lighter inside of that ring. Okay, so he's almost done. Like I said, I think I'm going to go a little bit over my hour time limit today because there's one more thing I want to do, and I didn't. I think maybe I mentioned this at the beginning, and that is that I want to use colored pencil. So before I do anything, I'm going to hit it with the hairdryer just to make sure everything's nice and dry. Alright, so got a little bit curled. I can take care of that in a little bit. So I'm going to pull out some colored pencil, and these are good, good quality. These are Derwent. Oh, sorry about all the noise. They're Derwent Color Soft pencils, and what I like is that there's kind of an equivalent for the colors that I've used, or at least something fairly close. So this is deep fuchsia. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to use some of the other colors. So this is what I like to do. If I'm going to use the Inktense, and I'm not using any kind of black inked outline, the Inktense is great, but I find that sometimes it's just a little. The edges are a little bit sloppy, so I can't get the kind of clean, crisp lines that I often like with my colors. So what I find is that if I use the colored pencil, so this is the deep fuchsia, but what I can see is that it just kind of blends in. So if I use it, I can shade, and so if I need to have an area a little darker, and then I can shade it out. So I actually like doing this instead of just using colored pencil. So you may have seen online and on social media that people will sit down and do these amazing colored pencil drawings, and it's just colored pencil on white paper, and they're doing all this shading and blending and all this stuff, and it's more like painting because of the way they're blending all these different colors together. But the issue is that you need to have very smooth paper to begin with, and you need to have you need to press really hard. It's called burnishing, and the colored pencils get shiny because you're pressing them so hard, and you're burnishing them. And when you burnish something, it gets shiny. So really, what you're doing is covering every single tiny little speck of paper. And so I find this is actually kind of interesting because the Inktense pencils allows me to get color down and to cover all the white specks. So here in this pink, it's filled in. All the little tiny white specks are filled in. So now when I come back in and shade on top of it, I'm just kind of it's almost like I'm just polishing it. I could spend a whole lot of time. I could use different colors and blend them together. But this allows me to get some really nice, crisp, sharp edges. It allows me to fill in and to shade. And if something's not quite as smooth as I had hoped, A lot of times with the colored pencil I can kind of make it a little bit smoother, a little more even. So the nice thing is if you have colored pencils and water soluble pencils by the same company, a lot of times it'll be the exact same color. So you thinking of Prismacolor. Prismacolor is great because they have watercolor pencils and then they have colored pencils and they are the exact same color. So they use the same names for their colors. Unfortunately, Derwent with their Inktense don't. They have Thistle and they have Sea Blue and a lot of other. They have Dark Chocolate and Shiraz, and they have a lot of food kind of themed ones. But there's no colored pencils that are named the exact same thing. But what I find is that a lot of these colored pencils match the Inktense pencils. Okay, so there's that, and then I'm gonna pull out. This says pink lavender, but it looks a little bit more like a pink. I just need a little bit more pink in the tongue. I just kind of didn't quite get the pink that I wanted. And the same thing with the pink around the eyes here. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. There's a color I'm looking for. Here it is. It's kind of a reddish violet color, and I think it'll be great for the horn up here. So it's not quite the same color as that thistle, but it's kind of a red violet. Works pretty well in there. It blends in pretty well with it. All right. Oops. Just sharpen the pencil. And then the teal green is a little bit more of a blue green, and this is just called green. But it's going to work well, and then I can shade it. Shade it in, make it a little bit more, little brighter, make it stand out a little bit more. Okay, and then for the purple, there's a color called Royal Purple, which works really well. And I'm not really sure if I need this purple so much. Just maybe look around and see if there's any edges that need to be fixed up a little bit. Maybe right here. So, I mean, things might be subtle. You might be like looking at it going, what's he doing? I don't see any difference. And sometimes it is just a subtle, like, oh, that line's a little straighter, it's a little neater, or it's a little darker there. Okay. And I'm going to go back to that red violet. It's actually called Loganberry. I'm going to bring in the line on his tongue. And then this is called ochre, so it's kind of a yellow ochre, and I'm going to use that just to bring in a little bit of yellow tint to the teeth. I didn't put anything with the Inktense pencils, so. And then a little bit of yellow tint on the horn. And then maybe a little bit of brown. This is a kind of a reddish brown called dark terracotta. just using this to go around the edge, just to bring the edge of the horn and the teeth out a little bit more. All right, so I'm thinking he's done. He looks pretty done. A little bit over my time limit, but not too much. I'm gonna grab a pen. So even though I didn't use pen, I'm gonna go ahead and use pen to sign it. All right. So here's day number 6, all taken care of. All right, so I hope you appreciated or like this kind of different view, different take on the monster day today using the water soluble materials. But like I said, you can use anything that you want. But yeah, really appreciate it. Now tomorrow I will be live streaming, hopefully if my internet holds up. So join me at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time tomorrow, Wednesday, and we'll go for day number 7, monster number 7. So thank you so much for tuning in, and as always, thank you so much, and happy creating.